Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 sports video. And today we're going to be looking at a non-World Cup one for once. But anyway, it is the top 10 Blue Jay regular season moments. I actually had done the top 10 Blue Jay postseason moments of all time just a while back. And now I'm going to allow myself to talk about the top 10 Blue Jay regular season moments of all time. I knew I had to split them up because the Blue Jays has had some great moments in the history, mostly the postseason, but we got to remember the regular season. The road to getting to the playoffs in the first freaking place. So, anyway, these are 10 fantastic Blue Jay moments of all time. And yes, there is one that has a personal connection with me. But don't worry, it's not going to be that high up on the list. Trust me. Number 10 is the 54 home run season of Jose Bautista Bomb in 2010. Jose Bautista was a cast off. Many organizations, Pittsburgh, the Mets, I think a few other teams knocked him out. Pittsburgh traded Jose Bautista to the Blue Jays for Robinson Diaz. They wanted this backup catcher for the Jays called Robinson Diaz. Well, Bautista in a new environment, like basically soared to great heights. It's akin to Edwin Encarnacion because Edwin Encarnacion was traded from the Reds for Scott Rowland. And it actually worked out in the Blue Jays' favor. But yeah, Bautista proved he was a good batter. The Blue Jays hitting staff worked on his approach in the plate, and it worked. Bautista would hit 54 home runs. He became the first and only Blue Jay to hit 50 home runs in a season in 2010, a few years after the trade from Pittsburgh. So he proved everyone wrong, and he set the record that George Bell had for 23 years. But yeah, Bautista is big and all that. He is a goodwill bastard for the Blue Jays in essence and actually appears in Murray Brown's chicken ads up north. Number 9 is Carlos Delgado's 4 home run game 2003. The Blue Jays in 2003 weren't really that bad. Doc Halladay was a hero, pitching himself to the Cy Young. And yeah, that was after I watched Halladay live against Baltimore in 2003 in a Cy Young season. But anyway, the Blue Jays didn't really have many other highlights. And in a seemingly innocent September game against Tampa Bay on TSN when TSN had the Blue Jays before Sportsnet took over, Carlos Delgado swung and had a few home runs off of who is that Tampa pitcher? I would say Esteban Young, but I'm wrong. But yeah, like Jorge Sosa. Delgado's first home run was his 300th in his major league career, and they had to find the baseball. And then he would put up 301, 302, and 303 in the same game, becoming the first Blue Jay, and actually the first and only player from a Canadian team to hit 4 home runs one game. I don't think any Expo ever did that. The Expos had it done against them with Bob Horner, but they still won the game. Carlos Delgado, 4 home runs in one game in 2003, which was amazing and all that. And of course, the Banners with their new sharp gray and black look, which kind of sucked, and the Rays were upset with that. But yeah, Delgado hitting 4 home runs in one game. Delgado came close to winning a bid to be in the Hall of Fame in 2026, maybe 2027. Yeah, Delgado was my favorite Blue Jay growing up in the late 90s, 2000s era and all that. Just want to let you know. Number 8 is the Blue Jays beating the Yankees in 1998, 9-3. It seems like an innocent game, but I was there. That's right. The Yankees and Blue Jays game from 1998 in July, I actually got to see personally. It was, I would like to say Joey Hamilton against Andy Pettitte. But anyway, the Blue Jays knew that the Yankees were powerful. The Yankees were powerful in the first half of the season. They were trying to break the most wins in one season, which was 114. Well, the modern record. The Cubs did have 116 wins in 1906, but they only played 152 games, whereas in the 162 game era, the Yankees were trying to beat the 1954 Tribe, who had 111 of them. So on a Sunday afternoon in mid-July, I got to see the Blue Jays against the Yankees. Personally, I mean, this was big because my Diamond side of the family, my dad's side of the family, got to go to one Blue Jay game a year because my Uncle John was a stockbroker at BMO and got tickets. So we've got to see a lot of games. My first Blue Jay game live was 93 when the Blue Jays beat the Royals on a Willie Canady home run. I also got to see the the Blue Jays beat the eventual NL champion Braves in '99. The Jays getting a grand slam from Marty Cordova to beat the eventual NL champs of 2000, the New York Mets. I got to see Roy Halladay sparkle in 2003 against the Orioles. I got to see the Blue Jays get Eric Hinske, the Rookie of the Year that year, hitting a home run off Boston in 2002. I got to get Seal Gustin's autograph in 2006. I got to see the Blue Jays taking on Cleveland and winning in 2026, like 3 months ago. But anyway, yeah, this win was personal. 1998 was big. 93 Blue Jays. Jose Canseco was on that roster, and Carlos Delgado actually hit the upper deck at the Rogers Center. So that was amazing to see. And see the Jays take care of the Yankees, who then won 114 games that season to set the modern record. Of course, the Mariners in 2001 would beat that with 116, but still, beating the Yankees, always good. Number 7 is John Olerud's chase for 400 in 1993. John Olerud was a pretty good hitter. He was a starter for Washington State. He would unfortunately have a brain aneurysm during a game and all that. Fortunately, though, his father was a doctor or neurosurgeon and got John Olerud cleared and all that. Olerud would always wear a batting helmet on defense and all that, just in case something happened. Olerud did something big. He didn't even play in the minor leagues. He went up with the big club in 1989. Fred McGriff was still there at first base and basically blocking Olerud until the Blue Jays figured Olerud is their first baseman of the future, and McGriff was sent in that big trade that got got Joe Carter and Robbie Alomar here. Olerud was good, and then in 1993, in August, as late as August, he was chasing 400. Basically, for every 5 times you're at the plate, you have to get 2 hits for 400. Olerud was hitting. He won the batting title with a 363 mark. Not half bad. But what's even more crazy is that Paul Molitor and Robbie Alomar actually were 2-3 in the batting race. That meant that the Blue Jays, for the first time in modern history, AL or NL, had the top 3 batters and all that. And that led them to the World Series. Of course, we don't talk about the World Series in this video because this is a regular season video. Number 6 is Steve Pearce going DP2. What can you do for walk-off grand slams twice in 1 week? Steve Pearce was an innocent player picked up from Baltimore. The Blue Jays had him in 2017. He was decent. And then against the Oakland A's on a Wednesday, I believe it was Wednesday, he hit a grand slam off of Oakland to win the game. That meant that, runs on first, second, and third, 4 runs. And then on a Sunday afternoon against the Angels, I wish I got to see that game, but, if the Diamond family thing was still around, that was probably the weekend. But nevertheless, Steve Pearce came up down 10-7 to the Angels with 1 out, bases full. He whacked one to left field over the fence, and it was just shocking to see someone hit 2 grand slams in 1 week. That's hard enough. But 2 walk-off grand slams in 1 week. And the Blue Jays fans went bonkers. Steve Pearce would be a valuable piece of the puzzle for Boston after they traded for him in the 2018 trade deadline and was named World Series MVP. Don't say you didn't warn you. Number 5 is the double AL East crowns of 2015 and 2025. These 2 were epic ones. They share something in common. Yes, I know the Blue Jays went, 85, we'll talk about that later. But they won the title division in 89, beating the Baltimore Orioles in the second last day of the season on the final regular season NBC broadcast of a baseball game for 5 years. And then 1991, they won the AL East by beating the Angels on a big hit by Joe Carter. In 92, they beat the Tigers on the last Saturday of the season on CBS with Dick Stockton on the call. And I know 93, they basically cruised through. But the fact of the matter is the 2015 and 2025 AL East crowns were one and the same. They were massive comebacks. The Blue Jays were pathetic. They were 50-51 at one point in the season, and then somehow in some freaking way they came through. They didn't do well in the wild card race. They didn't need to. They went all the way. They had a couple of 11-game winning streaks during the season, and the Blue Jays somehow, in some way, won the 2015 AL East. That got them a trip against Texas, and almost all the Blue Jays choked to the Rangers, but the Jays won Game 5, Batista's home run. Then 10 years later in 2025, the Blue Jays were looking terrible at the start of the season. They were actually no hit by the Houston Astros. But time kind of healed all wounds, and the Blue Jays came roaring back. And then, when did you know it? The Blue Jays had a great 7-0 homestand. They swept the New York Yankees in a 4-game series that wrapped around on Canada Day, and that started big for the Blue Jays. They tied the Yankees in the AL East. However, because the Blue Jays had better head-to-head, they were the AL champs. They were the 1 seed. They got the bye to the ALDS, where they would take on the New York Yankees, who beat Boston, and then the Jays beat the Yankees 3-1, and then took care of the Mariners in Game 7. Of course, remember, this is a regular season list, so I can't really talk about George Springer's home run, although I kind of did. And the Jays choked the World Series in Game 7. I mean, you're up 3-0 in Game 7. If it wasn't a choke job, I would be less pissed, really. Number 4 is Dave Stieb's no-hitter 1990. The Blue Jays had a great time. They had great pitchers and all that. Dave Stieb was actually drafted in the second year of existence for the Blue Jays in 1978. He was a part-time outfielder / pitcher. Stieb wanted to play in the outfield, but the Blue Jays convinced him to be a pitcher. And he was. He was pretty good. He was 8-8 in 1979, the worst season in Blue Jays history, but, it helped him out. In the 1980s, he would be in 4 straight All-Star games. He would be pitching quite well. But there was one problem. Dave Stieb had the tendency to choke 9th-inning no-hit bids. In 1985, at Old Comiskey Park against the White Sox, he gave up back-to-back home runs in the 9th that ruined that thing. 1988, there was a ball in Cleveland. He had a no-hitter going. Then Julio Franco hit a bad hop single over Benny Lee's head at second base and at Cleveland Stadium, and the Blue Jays, Eddie gave up a hit. At home, he had a no-hitter going until Jim Traber got a looping single over first base and Fred McGriff. So back-to-back games, back-to-back one-hitters. And then in 1989 at the Sky Dome, he had a perfect game going until the 27th batter. Roberto Kelly came up and hit a double down the left field line. Even Phil Rizzuto, who was doing the Yankees play-by-play stuff, was shocked. Then an innocent Labor Day weekend game, Toronto going to Cleveland on, where the Cleveland Air Show was. Dave Stieb was in a zone. He did walk a few batters, but he got, I can't remember, Alex Cole to fly out a 1-2 pitch to right field. And Don Chevrier for CTV said, he has got it. A no-hitter for Dave Stieb. The long frustration is finally over. The first in Blue Jays history. And unfortunately, the only Blue Jays no-hitter in history. The Jays have been close. Brendan Morrow actually was, 1 out away from a no-hitter in 2010? I remember watching that. I was like, what the frick? Number 3 is the Blue Jays opening day game, 1977. You always remember your first. But yeah, the snow game was the legendary one in 1977. The Blue Jays were born out of a strange story. So the San Francisco Giants were actually bleeding money and were about to move to Toronto to become the Toronto Giants. And I think the Toronto Giants would have been in the National League to fight Montreal for Canadian supremacy. Only problem was San Francisco Mayor George Moscone. Yes, that mayor who got shot alongside Harvey Milk in 1978. He's put an injunction, and in San Francisco's Bob Lowry bought the team. Of course, Seattle was trying to get a team because of them losing the pilots after one season and basically be told almost at the 12th hour they couldn't have the team to start the 1970 season. So they were thinking about a lawsuit and all that, and the American League decided to expand to shut Seattle up, in a sense. They needed a second place. They wanted Washington because, Washington was the American nation's capital. However, Toronto became a strong candidate. For one thing, they lost possession of the Giants. But the second thing is that Ewing Kauffman, the great owner of the Kansas City Royals, and of course the guy in which the stadium is named after him, said that Toronto looked good. It wasn't Ewing Kauffman that technically did it. It was his wife Muriel, who was a native of Toronto, who sold him on Toronto's merits. And that's how Toronto got the team. So in 1977, in front of the ragtags, they took on the Chicago White Sox in a game that normally would have been postponed because of the snow, but because this was the first game in Blue Jays history, they had to play it. So on a lonely Thursday, April 7th, 1977, the Blue Jays were hosting the White Sox on CBC when they had baseball. Don Chevrier and Whitey Ford, yes, that Whitey Ford, on the commentary stage. The Blue Jays ended up winning 9-5. Doug Ault became the first Blue Jay hero, hitting 2 home runs on opening day. And it was just amazing, all that, to see the Blue Jays do so well. They were first place in the AL East for a few days, but then they fell into oblivion. However, another 1977 moment that should have been on this list was their 19-3 victory over the Yankees in 1977. Imagine scoring 19 runs on the eventual world champion Yankees. That's just amazing. And they're an expansion team, too. It's akin to the Raptors in their expansion season of 1996, upsetting Michael Jordan at the Skydome. 109-108, what would have been the Raptors' best game of all time for a long time. Too long. Number 2 is the AL MVP jobs of both George Bell and Josh Donaldson. We're doing a twofer here for number 2. So Josh Donaldson was a good player in 2015, picked up in a deal with the Oakland Athletics, and he proved he belonged in Toronto instead of Oakland. He won the MVP. The 2015 Blue Jays went on to the ALCS, lost Game 6 to Kansas City. Donaldson was a hero in the ALDS in 2016 with scoring the winning run to knock out Texas, and that fan sign of "I'd rather be punched in May," because Odor punched Jose Bautista, than knocked out in October because Texas got swept by the Blue Jays. But yeah, Josh Donaldson was pretty good and all that. But nothing compares to the first AL MVP, which in my mind was undeserved. George Bell was pretty good and all that. He was a good player, part of one of the greatest outfields of all time with Barfield and Mosby. But George Bell hit 47 home runs, 134 RBIs. He was the AL MVP. Unfortunately, the final week of the 1987 season was one of the worst moments in Blue Jays history. The Blue Jays were 3.5 games up on the Tigers with 7 to play. All they needed to do was win a few games, presto changeo, you're fine. You're going to the ALCS against the Minnesota Twins. Unfortunately, the Jays choked, losing every game in that final week, including the 3-game series in Detroit, in which all they needed to do was win 1 game to force a 1-game playoff, probably in Toronto, by my guess, or win 2 out of 3 and you practically win the division, but they choked. Alan Trammell played his damn heart out and should have won the AL MVP. And this is coming from a Blue Jay fan, too. But number 1, by any stretch of the imagination, you might think it's a little biased, but here it is. The best regular season moment of all time, the Blue Jays winning their first AL East title in 1985. I call it biased because, I'm from Toronto, and that's the year I was born. So I was born in 1985. Anyway, the Blue Jays were coming off some close calls. 83, they led for much of the season, but in August, they had a disastrous road trip in Baltimore and Detroit, including Tippy Martinez picking off 3 batters by himself. 1984, the Jays looked pretty dominant. Unfortunately, though, they were in the same division as the Tigers, who started out 35-5. So the Blue Jays in 85 made some big moves. One big move was getting rid of Alfredo Griffin, who was the AL Rookie of the Year 1979, trading him to Oakland for the one of Bill Caudill, basically trying to get a closer and all that. They also picked up Gary LaFell from the Giants, but those two couldn't solve the bullpen woes, and it took a Rule 5 pick, or a guy that Texas didn't want by the name of Tom Hankey, to actually pull off the closer spot. Blue Jays made some moves. They picked up Al Oliver and Jeff Burrows into the season. No, and Cliff Johnson too. I think Jeff Burrows was traded away. But anyway, the Blue Jays looked pretty dominant. 1985, Ernie Witt was still good at catcher. First base was Willie Upshaw. Second base was Damaso Garcia, Malcontent, if you will. Shortstop went to Tony Fernandez because it's now his playground. Third base was the platoon of Rance Mullins and Garth Orge. The outfield, Bell, Mosby, Barfield. Couldn't replace it. The DH was basically Cliff Johnson. The pitching staff, you had Jimmy Key becoming the first left-hander in 5 years to win a game, to win a start. You had Dave Stieb, icon, 14-13, but he was the ERA champion. You also had Jim Clancy, who unfortunately got hurt most of the time. You had Dower Doyle Alexander, who had a good 17-6 season, and the bullpen was okay. But the Blue Jays had a problem. Even though they led the AL East in May, all the way past May, they had to face the Yankees in a famous 4-game series in September, which saw the Jays won 3 out of 4. And of course, fans booing the Canadian national anthem and the legendary PA announcer Bob Shepard reminding people before each of the last 3 games that Canada sacrificed so much to get the hostages out of Iran, which was true. And of course, that was when Mary O'Dowd tried to sing "Oh Canada" like "Oh Christmas Tree." But anyway, the Jays did that, and then the Jays, all they needed to do was win the last Friday against the Yankees on home turf to win the division. They had it, but then Hanky gave up a home run to what is his name? Oh, name escapes me, from the Yankees. He was some kind of second rate guy. Can't remember. I'd say Balboni, but I'm really wrong. But anyway, yeah, the Yankees won. Then came Saturday afternoon. The Blue Jays were hosting the Yankees. TSN, you know, the Canadian answer to ESPN was supposed to broadcast the game, but because of how big it was, they turned the rights over to CTV, you know, the parent company. CTV would have had Don Chevrier and Tony Kubiak on the call. Tony Kubiak, sorry. Yeah, but unfortunately, they both had to deal with stuff. Kubiak was part of NBC's Game of the Week, and Chevrier was doing stuff for CBC as well, CTV. So Chevrier, so they both were in the States. So Fergie Oliver, you know, the guy who was the guy who emceed Just Like Mom, you know, the Canadian game show CTV had, and former Expo icon Ken Singleton were on the call. Dower Doyle pitched a great game. Jays won 5-1 thanks to 3 solo home runs. Billy Martin went nuts. And then, of course, the fly ball right to George Bell's glove. And George Bell basically slid on his knee, got down on his knees. And 8 years after the Blue Jays existed, they got the AL East title. I wish that the 85 playoffs were a great moment in Blue Jays history, but they weren't because they fumbled. They fumbled the bag, losing to the Royals. They were up 3 games to 1 and choked the last 3 games. Now, before 1985, the LCS was best of 5. So the Jays would have qualified for the World Series. They would have faced the St. Louis Cardinals, probably lost by my guess. But what's even more big is it's not the Blue Jays thing I was worried about. You know about Ozzie Smith's Game 5 home run to win that game and force a Game 6 in Los Angeles with the Cardinals up 3 games to 2. Well, that would have been a pennant-winning home run and basically put it on par with Chris Chambliss's pennant-winning home run. But yeah, the Blue Jays choked in 1985, and I feel terrible being born in the same year as the worst season in Leafs history, Leafs modern history, and the year the Blue Jays choked. Why me? Why me? Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond.